The views expressed here on Now See Here are not necessarily those of the sponsors, advertisers, Jack Chris the host, or Roddy Merritt. Hello everybody, Jack Chris here. This is the Now See Here podcast where we broadcast every Wednesday from CC's Coffee House in Ridgeland, Mississippi. We appreciate them letting us come into their facility and have coffee and water and all kind of great treats. SettleMyCase.com is upstairs, and as we've been promoting and promising, we've got a great show today, and we're taking a different tack. We normally have one guest on, but because of the subject matter and by popular demand, I'm glad to say that for Now See Here, we've got two experts in their fields and two very opinionated people, very intelligent people, to discuss the subject of drug legalization and the effects of drug prohibition. Mr. Danny Bedwell's to my immediate left. Danny, of course, is well known to this podcast. He's been on the show before. He is one of our sponsors. He's running for the Senate, District 17. Danny, thanks for coming down from Columbus.
Well, thanks for having me, Jack. I just want to be here, and I want to participate in this, and I'm looking forward to debating this with you, Christina.
Ms. Christina Dent, Ended for Good is her organization. She was on just recently, and Christine, again, you lit up Facebook and social media, so we appreciate that. It's good for us, and the topic is good for everybody to hear,
Absolutely.
Especially in Mississippi. What I want to do, because this is going to be kind of a free-for-all, spontaneous thing, but first, if you all don't mind, as is typical with a debate, open up with your opening statement, what you believe, what you advocate, and then we'll jump in and start seeing where the differences lie. Christina, why don't we'll let ladies go first. Tell us what your position is and what Ended for Good advocates and stands for.
So we advocate for a legalized, regulated drug market for all drugs, not just marijuana, but for heroin, cocaine, ecstasy, for all these drugs to be brought back into a legal market again to end the harms of prohibition. So we're not pro-drug. We don't want people using them unless it's for some sort of medical purpose, but we would rather they have the option to do that because it's so harmful to prohibit them. So we really are coming at it from harm reduction. How do we reduce the potential harms of drugs? That's our highest value.
And Ended for Good is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that
We're in the process of becoming 501c3.
Right.
We operate under another organization, C3, right now.
But primarily an educational.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Danny, you're kind of Mr. Libertarian here in Mississippi. Anyone who keeps up with you on Facebook knows your views. You're not afraid to tell it like it is. And you're running, of course, as a political candidate right now for Senate. Your stance on this issue, and if you get into the mic there a little bit closer, and because we want to hear you.
I agree with Christina 100% of what she just said. I want to end it for good. I don't want to regulate it. I don't want to tax it. I want to treat it no differently than an ear of corn or a pair of socks. I want to let the market. This is not to say that I don't want it regulated. I do want it regulated. I just think that a free market can regulate it better than, say, bureaucrats at the health department or at the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics. So we want the same thing. We all know that the war on drugs is horrible. The war on drugs has destroyed more families than the drugs have. They've just about stripped our constitutional protections. I mean, right now cops can kick your door in because a dog, sniffed or a dog barked. They can kick your door in now and search you without a warrant. So it's really lost our constitutional protections. So what I want to do is get away from that and actually legalize freedom, as I say, freedom to do as you please.
All right, let me jump in and play devil's advocate. Given the fact that you both gave out your respective positions, Danny, let me ask you, don't you think Christina's is probably the one that would go into effect first because the state is going to say, well, this is under our jurisdiction, and we're going to take the money from it because we want the money from it. And you brought stats showing
Right.
the money that can be gained. So realistically, don't you think her view is going to win out over yours first?
Absolutely. And let me say why. It's no different than the lottery. If I run a numbers racket in my basement, I can the cops will kick my door in and tote me off to jail. However, if I call it a lottery and I give the state a piece of the action, it's now all of a sudden it's good. Marijuana sales is the same way. It's been evil. We've thrown a lot of people in jail because of it. But now, all of a sudden, if we give the state a piece of the action, give these senators and these representatives money to spend, they will approve it. So, yeah, you're right. Her view is probably going to pass because the money's involved there. These people get paid off for accepting her view. But all I'm trying to say is and I want the record to show, Jack, I'm not a consumer, not of marijuana or of drugs. Bourbon is my vice of choice. But as a general consumer, this taxes that we're going to apply to marijuana is going to come directly out of the consumer's pocket and go into the state legislature's pocket. And this is what I'm trying to prevent.
And what do you think about that, Christina? I mean,
so for me, I'm okay with that to a point. So I would say that they should be regulated only as much as can bring the market legal, and so if you regulate too highly or you tax too highly, the underground market continues to thrive. And we can see that in places, Colorado still has some portion of their marijuana market is still an underground market. They've regulated it too tightly, taxed it maybe a little too much. And so there's still space for an underground market to take that market share. So I think you can't do that. The goal is to get all of it in a legal market. But I'm okay with some taxation of it, and I'm okay with regulation of it. The main piece, I think, the regulation part should be is adult use, that you have to be a certain age to purchase it. I can't conceive
like alcohol or
right,
cigarettes.
like alcohol or cigarettes.
Yeah.
I can't conceive of America today, with all of the other current laws and regulations that we have, how an unregulated drug market could work. I can see, I guess, where you're coming from a little bit. If you could take maybe all of the other things out, but I would love to know how you can see that in today's market. So make the case for me.
I will.
For how in America today deregulation could work.
Sure. In Massachusetts, which has legalized marijuana sales, both legal and recreation, 75% of all marijuana sales or purchases are black market. And it's because of what you said, the high regulations. A lot of people don't want their name on a list. One of these groups are veterans that use it to treat PTSD. Mm-hmm. If a veteran goes to a VA hospital for his PTSD and he happens to mention that he uses marijuana to help treat his PTSD, the doctor must, by law, because it's regulated, by law, the doctor must also diagnose him with SUD, S-U-D, substance use disorder, mm-hmm. also called substance abuse. Mm-hmm. Now, all of a sudden, the BATF, the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms, when a licensed gun dealer tries to sell that veteran a gun, his name pops up and he can't buy a gun anymore. Mm-hmm. And this all happens because we get the Department of Health involved and also the BATF. How would it work in a free market? Could you imagine all the farmers in the Delta not having to get a license, just planting millions of acres of marijuana? You want to keep the drug cartels out? Good. Here's how you do it. Replace cotton with marijuana plants, and that marijuana now becomes something like $10, $15 a pound. Maybe by bushel. I don't know. You buy it by the bushel, 10 or 15 pounds. There'd be no use for drug cartels to come in and try to undercut the market. People could grow it in their backyard. And how do we keep it out of the reach of children? I'll address that. The same way we keep it out of the reach, we keep Drano and razor blades out of the reach of children. We be parents. I have dangerous things in my home now. But my kids don't have access to. But my kids don't have access to them.
But how would you keep a 12-year-old from going to Walmart and buying heroin off the shelf?
Yeah, that doesn't happen now, though. And it doesn't happen with the black market, and it doesn't happen with legal alcohol sales or even tobacco sales.
Right, but alcohol and tobacco are age restricted.
Right, but she's saying it would happen.
Yeah, but even today, with alcohol and tobacco age restricted, there are millions of teens that get alcohol and tobacco.
And heroin.
It's a little
so
harder.
I'm going to say
it's a little harder if it's behind a counter.
The prohibitions aren't going to work. In prohibition, I like the name of your organization, by the way. End It for Good. Is that the name of it? Mm-hmm. Okay. Colorado tried to end it for good. Just in May, the 30-day period, May of 2019, 40 arrests were made, 250 locations searched, 80,000 marijuana plants seized. Again, this is where it's legal and it's regulated. 41 homes, 25 vehicles, and more than $2.1 million in cash were seized. 16 were charged with federal crimes in a state where it was legal. This still happens. So when we end it for good, it doesn't appear that Colorado ended it for good. The drug war still exists. There's still doors being kicked in. There's still people being arrested. Sometimes it's because their paperwork's not in order. So
would you say that? So I would say, well, that's true, but there's a lot less drug war in Colorado today than there was when it was
on the contrary.
prohibited?
There's a sheriff in Teller County, and he said that since it's become legal, 15% rise in drug crimes. 15% rise. And he's quoted in a Denver newspaper saying this, the sheriff of Teller County. So in this case, legalizing it, actually, the end result was more illegal drug activity, and the state got more money out of the deal.
Yeah, but 70% of their marijuana industry has come legal now. They still have a 30%
Sure,
irregular black market or underground market, but they have 70% less of all of the harms of the illicit market that's happening.
Not crime. I mean,
But they have fewer adult arrests.
No, the sheriff of Teller County said he's got 15% more.
I don't think on statistics, study-wise, they haven't had that.
Sure, I'm sure it's anecdotal. But
and I would imagine that the sheriff is he anti-legalization?
he doesn't care. And I don't know the man personally.
Yeah.
But, I mean, he's a sheriff. He's there to uphold the law, whatever it is. So he's
Yeah.
trying to uphold
The things that I've read
Colorado's law.
about Colorado is their adult arrest rate for marijuana is way down. Their youth arrest rate is up. So it's I see that as kind of a shifting of when you have this massive machine that's going to arrest people for marijuana and you take away the vast majority of the people that they can arrest now
Sure.
for adults, there will be more of that directed at youth. Now, I think they should have decriminalized youth. It is crazy to me that you could be arrested as a 17-year-old in Colorado. We're still addressing marijuana use for youth as a criminal issue, but not for adults. I think that's wrong, and that should change. But I think they are steps ahead of where Mississippi is. Now, would you agree?
No, I would
Or
not.
do you think?
I would not. And I'm going to quote a drug enforcement agent in Colorado as saying the exact same thing, that he said what the black market does is it actually, when people can buy their marijuana cheaper, it actually expands the black market. And that's a DEA agent that said it, and I can bring his quote if you need to see it. But again, Governor Newsom from California, they've legalized it. He's now talking about bringing in 150 National Guard troops to combat the illegal grows in his state. It doesn't sound like we've ended the war on drugs, does it?
So you're saying you don't want it legalized unless
No, I want it
be
decriminalized.
deregulated.
I want it decriminalized. I would vote for a law that said it is no longer a crime to own, possess, buy, sell, smoke, ingest, grow, transport marijuana. The end.
Okay, but if you only had the option of legalizing it in a way, say Colorado has done, or keeping it like it is right now here in Mississippi,
I do not accept that premise. I think someone has to be out there making the argument that we can decriminalize it. There's a third option.
It's getting violent here, folks. And I don't think I've said 3 words. This is amazing for me, but I love it. Keep it rolling.
No, yeah, sure.
See, and that's where we part ways, I think, because I don't think we can make that quantum leap, but I think we can move there, and I think this is.
I'm okay with it, and this is on every issue. If there is a path, I'm not a button pusher. So what I say is if there was a magic button that I could push, and everything be the way I want it right now, would I push it? Probably not, because it causes a lot of pain for a lot of people. Legalizing marijuana, if what you propose, if there is a path to get to where I want to be, I'll support you. But there has to be a path there. There has to be some way that we get from here to there. But in the history of mankind, once we turn something over to government to go, here, you may regulate this, we never get it back.
And let me interject. This is Now See Here, the podcast. Danny Bedwell, Christina Dent. Here's the thing, Danny. I mean, you and I, as libertarians, we've read this literature, we've heard it, but to most people, it's craziness, or they've never been taught proper libertarian theory. They think that we are libertines,
That's right.
Or, back in the old days, laissez-faire, they called us lazy fairies because we were against the draft. I'm thinking Christina, her path would probably be that first incremental step to what you want to happen. Now, I may be wrong, but I'm thinking.
I don't know that I don't know that I could go there, but I don't think I could see that in without starting a country in your world of libertarianism. If
We're trying for that.
We started one, actually. we actually started one. And
that was a long time ago.
It's been taken away from us.
But in the world I live in and seeing the people that I see who are being harmed by the drug war, to me, I say, I can only start here, and I can take the steps I can take. I don't think I could get to where you are ideologically without actually seeing those steps happening and seeing the fallout from what happens.
The incremental.
Incrementally. Mm-hmm.
Through incrementalism. And I'm okay with it. We've gotten to where we are today through incrementalism.
But that doesn't happen with government, does it?
It might take a little incrementalism to get it back. I would suggest, if you've ever done any research into Portugal and how they've treated their drug addicts and how they've drastically reduced drug use, heroin, meth and crack don't exist in Portugal. It's really just heroin and cocaine, the powdered cocaine, and there's no longer a crime. It's been decriminalized, and you can't end up in jail for having a bag of heroin in your shirt pocket. So.
But decriminalized in a different way that you're talking about decriminalization here. They've only decriminalized use, but they haven't actually legalized the production or sale of substances there. It's only
these words, we have to be careful because legalized, what that means is we're going to put it into the hands of legislatures to make rules concerning it. And no, did they do that? Yeah, they actually did. Portugal did put it into the hands of legislatures to govern the use of heroin and
but it's still illegal to produce it there. You can't. It's still illegal to produce it and sell it. It's just not legal to possess it. Right. But you're saying it should be legal to produce, to sell,
I think cotton farmers should have another option. Right now, we're paying farmers not to farm under the CRP program. We pay farmers not to farm. Turn them loose, and we could just flood the free market with cheap marijuana and get it. The reason there's so much violence in it is because there's so much money in it.
Heart rates are rising, as you say.
There's so much money in it.
With cheap marijuana.
I mean, if you
everybody like me is going, what?
How would you feel if they flooded the market with cheap? I don't care, cans of corn or diapers, or for me, I would love it if they would flood the market with cheap bourbon, but they don't. I would love cheap ink pens and cheap.
But there's not that stigma attached to it, Danny. And that's what Christina was talking about earlier.
Cheap aspirin, cheap Motrin, cheap laxatives. I don't care. We should try to make our products cheaper, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Jefferson was a hemp farmer, was he not? Thomas Jefferson.
He was a libertarian, so.
Well, he was back in his day. Now, see, here's the podcast. We're also on YouTube. Roddy, how are we doing on time, rather, for our first segment? We're doing okay. Christina Dent, the organization is End It for Good. Danny Bedwell, who's a well-known libertarian, he is running for the state Senate, District 17. Danny, do people look at you like you're just absolutely crazy? But are there other politicians or people seeking office, other fellow libertarians who agree 100% with you?
There's some Republicans and Democrats that agree with me.
Really?
And some libertarians that agree with me as well. So it really has to do not so much with party labels. Some people that call themselves conservatives, they have issue with it on the moral or ethical side.
Yeah.
Some liberals who think we should tax everyone at every opportunity, they have a problem with it. But I think conservatives, libertarians, and Democrats, liberals, Republicans, Greens, Constitution Party, everyone in America has come to realize that this war on drugs has failed. It really, really has failed. You can get drugs just about on any street corner in any small town in America. So as we said, we've broken up families. We've thrown people in prison. We can't even keep drugs out of prison. We x-ray people and shakedowns and dogs sniffing, and we can't even keep out of prison.
As long as there's profit to be had, there'll be people willing to participate.
That's right.
Why do you think, and Christina and I touched on this, kind of the moral aspect of it. I'll just ask you both personally and ask you again, Christina, why do people, do you think, want that high? And I'm not talking about the person who breaks a leg and has to get on painkillers and, has to need it. I'm talking about why do kids want to escape reality? Why do adults want to be at a party? I read something on Facebook the other day. This young man went to a party with some college friends, and one of his buddies said, "Here, take this." He took it and he died. Why do people want to get stoned and high in the first place?
I don't understand it. I'm not a psychologist.
I mean, we drink. I drink.
Sure.
And you know.
I think I drink, and I did a little research into PTSD. As you know, I'm a veteran.
Right.
I did a little research into PTSD. There's 20 veterans a day committing suicide. And a lot of the veterans that we were talking about cannabis use, a lot of the veterans are using cannabis to treat their PTSD. And what they said was that they're giving them drugs. And one guy said that he's taking over 10,000 pills a year to treat his anxiety and his PTSD. And he says, to overcome all of that before he goes to bed, he smokes a joint, and it helps him sleep. It makes him fall asleep to where he's just too wired before. That's medically speaking.
That's a medical issue, yeah.
Alleviating
pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish I could tell why people
do what they do. Well, Christina, have you worked with people who are addicted or addicts? Have you met with them before?
I have met them at more people in recovery as opposed to active addiction.
And did they tell you?
Yeah, it is. They would say it's always a result of some. Well, I wouldn't say they would say always. So some people say I don't understand it. A lot of people say treatment helped me to address those underlying issues, the disconnection, the broken relationships, the trauma they've been through. Even for veterans, you think the result of PTSD and things like that is not. That is emotional trauma that they have been through, and everybody is trying to escape in some way, whether or not you just have a drink after work because it
or
just
go running.
it's just, or you go running,
get the
or
runner's
you go
high,
have
yeah.
a snack or whatever people do to try to help that. One of the people that we had on the End It for Good podcast said if he could wave a magic wand over America's addiction problem, he would take away our status as a superpower. And he's a psychologist who's worked for decades in addiction. He said countries that are superpowers have high addiction rates. There's a lot of fear and anxiety that come with the amount of power, even for the people who live there, even if they're not in political office, which I thought was very interesting. I've never thought about that before. But America is in a crisis, a cultural crisis that's driving all of these addictions. It's been happening over the last couple of decades. Our overdose rates have been doubling about every 9 years for the last several decades. This is not a new thing. It's been slowly, quietly happening. And because it's so stigmatized, and drug use and drug addiction especially is so stigmatized, nobody wanted to say anything about it. Nobody wanted to include that in an obituary, how their loved one passed away. So it's been creeping up on us as this kind of cultural crisis that we're in. I'm still not sure exactly what's driving that, but there's such high rates of anxiety and depression for people my age. I'm in my mid-30s. There is lots of things wrong with our culture right now. I think spiritual crisis, all kinds of crises, and that's coming out in bad coping mechanisms, whether it's drugs or whether it's all different Facebook and being on your phone all the time or working constantly or all of these things that we're trying to use to not have to be present in a life that we find hard to be present in.
Before we get back to the topic at hand, and that's debating and discussing the aspects of drug legalization, let me add my point of view to this. I'm a big Ayn Rand admirer. She wrote an amazing essay years ago, and she maintained, she wrote it in '69, about the time of the Woodstock generation. All the kids were taking LSD and all that. She said the reason young people are using drugs to escape is because of the educational system. They're not being taught to use their reasoning minds. They're being taught to memorize. They're bored out of their skulls. And if you ever have been into a school, even when I was growing up, most of us were bored because the teaching methods are so wrong. The CSA methods and the parroting, P-A-R-R-O, parrot, mock. And that the kids' minds should be, as she said, we're putting shackles where wings should be. And they get so frustrated that they turn to drugs to find something exciting about life because their educational system has failed them.
Something that will exercise their thought process.
Because she said,
the school's not doing it.
She didn't even drink because she said, I don't want to alter reality in any way. I find reality beautiful as it is, and I don't want to compromise my rational faculty. What do you think of that argument? Do you think there's credence that modern education, going back since the Dewey, John Dewey and his progressivism education took place, does that have something to do with high drug use?
I would say I can't relate it, but I'll say possibly. I wouldn't doubt it. I know that the one-size-fits-all model of education that we try now, where we put everybody into a room and make them memorize facts and all this, that one-size-fits-all is probably not working. And the gifted ones are probably bored, and the ones that can't keep up, they're bored. And I think we need to actually pattern education to individuals instead of groups.
And Christina, I know you homeschooled your children. I homeschooled my daughter too. The other ironic thing, before I get your answer to the question, is I hear the drug problems in schools are highest in the best schools.
Right.
Where there's more wealthy.
Well, they can afford it.
Well, that's part of it. When I was growing up, and I'm not going to mention the school's name, I could, but the best private school in Jackson, all the kids knew if you wanted the best weed or the best pills, that's where you have to go, because those kids have it.
Can I say one thing to address something that you touched on, which is very important?
Get Christina's permission.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, Jack.
No.
One thing you missed was that you touched on, and I'll make this quick, Roddy. One thing you touched on was the overdose, and a teen that does overdose, their friends are sometimes afraid to take them to the emergency room because they get in trouble.
That's
All
true
of a sudden
too.
they're in
Yeah.
drug. So that's the other thing that the drug war hurts. And if it was not illegal, their teen friends wouldn't just dump them in a parking lot somewhere. They might take them to the emergency room.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so many complex reasons of why people are using drugs. And so to me, trying to nail it down to one, for me, is unproductive, because I think people all look at their own lives and say, wow, my life is just complex. I've known people who were addicted who were homeschooled, Christian schooled, private schooled, public
Good
schooled.
kids.
Right.
Great kids. This is not there's the moral ones who don't get addicted and the immoral ones who do. That is such a wrong way. There's no backing for that in any kind of medical literature, any kind of study. And we have just believed that narrative for so long, and it's so harmful for people to be able to come out of those shadows and get help for what they need.
Because people are labeled as criminals because they're taking medication that sometimes either physiologically they can't shake or psychologically, yet they're considered criminals. And you know what? The ones who are professionals, who probably need the help the most, are the ones that aren't going to seek it. Because if they're high up in their community, how's that going to look? If they go and say, oh, I got to check myself into rehab. Now, if you're an actor or an actress, it's the thing to do in Hollywood.
That's what veterans say. They don't want their name on a list because there's that stigma.
Neither does a CEO. A CEO doesn't want it, you know. So we are through with part one. We're going to take a break, regroup, get some more of that CC's coffee, and decide on what we're going to yell about next. This is the Now See Here podcast. I'm Jack Chris, your host. We've got Danny Bedwell, Christina Dent. We're talking about the very important topic of drug legalization, and we'll be back with part two. Please stay with us.